Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Inside Carolina Coast to Coast podcast. We are now live. I do apologize for the delay there, trying to get this stuff set up. I'm your host for this one, Jon Seiglie. Joey Powell could not make it, but fortunately, the heavy lifting for this podcast will be done by my two awesome guests, Sean Moran and Sherrell McMillan. As always, guys, it's the off season, but that does not stop the recruiting news definitely. Almost forgot. Let me get in the quick plug for Giant T-Shirt and GiantT-Shirt.com, our amazing sponsors. Remember, you do get 10% off of Giant T-Shirt and GiantT-Shirt.com with your Inside Carolina Premium membership. Let's just jump right into this one, guys. There may not be too much to talk to, but there was some recruiting news coming out of the weekend, so we'll definitely hit on that. Did want to ask you both a question, though. This is the first podcast that we've had since the NBA draft. I know not really a key draft for Tar Heel fans, but for Charlotte Hornet fans, maybe. Do you guys want to spend a quick, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes here just talking about the past draft, or do you guys have any burning hot takes that you wanted to get off your chest about that? Who wants
Go
to go
ahead,
first?
Charles. Go ahead, Charles. You're smiling. I know what you're gonna say.
Yeah,
Go
come on, Sean.
ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm unfortunately a Washington Wizards fan, so they decided to tank 1 year after probably they should have. But man, if I was Charlotte, I would have gone Scoot Henderson and played him with LaMelo. And in terms of Charlotte, Leaky Black signing the two-way contract, I think is fantastic for him. We've obviously, or myself, have had kind of a love-hate relationship with him over the 5 years of him being at UNC, plus all the years we covered him. But great to see him, get a pretty significant contract out of school. Obviously, that will be determined by how many days he does spend in the NBA versus G League. But I think it'll be really interesting to see. I think he fits the prototype of the 3-and-D wing that everybody loves, and if he can improve that shooting, we've seen a lot of guys go from college that have not shot the ball well, and they work on it in the NBA. And it'll be interesting just to see if the shooting coaches or the trainers at that level can work on his shot and make him more of an offensive threat. Because obviously the defense is there, and the guy who went number 2, he was able to lock down at the beginning of the year. So it'll be interesting to track, him through this season as well as his career. But I think, obviously a good landing spot and a really good financial opportunity right out of school. And the one last thing on him, I think the first time I saw him was at Adidas Nations back when he was going into his junior year, and he was one of the young guys, and he was getting worked by Trayvon Duval at the time. And Trayvon Duval, I don't even know if he's still playing overseas or if he's playing. So once again, everybody takes their own path, but here he is all these years later, and probably ahead of a guy like Duval and others at this point in time. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here.
Well, I am curious how much trash talk there is going to be between Miller and Leaky. I mean, what do you think, Sean? Do you think, knowing Leaky's personality, and I'm going to ask this to Rel too, but do you think there may be a little bit of some sportsmanship going on, we'll say?
I'm sure a little bit at the beginning, but I think Miller probably expanded his game a lot since that November night. And once these two guys are coming at it very differently from a number 2 pick to a two-way. So but I think Leaky will be able to give him trouble in training camp.
All right, Rel, let's get your quick thoughts. Just start wherever, man. You want to talk Leaky, Miller, Hornets? Take it wherever you want to go.
Yeah, I was gonna say the first thing is kind of Leaky Black is like the last laugh because he's been a lightning rod of praise and criticism for the UNC fan base, not just for his 5 years at Carolina, which how many people will ever get to play 5 years at the school? So that makes him unique as it is. But even before, when he committed the January of his sophomore season. So he's been kind of in the Carolina sphere for not quite 8 years. That's a really, really long time. And from the beginning, there have been kind of people who are, detractors of his game. And I would say for some of it, rightfully so. But in the end, he's got a degree from a great school. He started for 4 years, played for 5, played in the Final Four, was in 2 of the, 5 biggest non-championship wins in Carolina history, and is now, going to be on an NBA two-way contract and probably will make enough money to at least get a good head start on life if he does nothing else. So I would say his basketball career at this point has already been a success for someone who was ranked in, I think, ended up being ranked in the 80s. You can't ask really for much more. So,
Yeah.
just happy for him. He's come a long way, and now he has an opportunity to really change the life of his family forever, and generational wealth, that kind of thing. He has that opportunity if he can
Mhm.
make it in NBA. So all you want is a chance. So that's one thing, and the other is just I know this is going to sound old school, but just how much potential talent in college went into the NBA draft and didn't get drafted.
Yeah.
Um, I know some guys tire of being in college; they get tired of going to class. I thought NIL would help a little bit, and it probably has. But when you see guys like Oscar Sheway and Drew Timmy who had eligibility left go into the draft and not get drafted, that's disheartening because it could really help the college game if guys like that came back. Obviously, it's a risk. You
Mhm.
don't know. You could get hurt, or you could get drafted if you go into the draft. It's a risk, but it'd have been nice to see some of those guys stay in college and help the college game.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting, just like you said, Real, the guys who didn't get drafted, but also, I mean, Miller going to was from Bama, number one guy, played in professional league in France. And then I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Scoot and the Twins were all from the amateur-ish pro leagues. I mean, it's something that we've heard talk about a lot, is that the G League and those affiliates are really going to start eating into the talent of college basketball. Sherrell, start with you. Do you think that that is something we're finally seeing the fruition of that come into play?
To some degree, I mean, the fact that it happened at least once, where five, like you said, was it four of the top five guys didn't
Mhm.
play college basketball, I think shows you that, yeah, something's happening. But I think a lot of it's going to vary depending on class. When you look at the next kind of great class, which is pegged to be the class of 2025, I think three of the four of those top five guys already said they're going to college.
Hmm.
Obviously, a lot can change in a couple of years, but I think it just varies by situation and by class. Scoot's deal was unprecedented at the time. I don't
Yeah.
think we've seen one quite like his since. Sean, correct me if I'm wrong. But so I think it varies. I don't think this is like going to be every single year, but it's definitely here to stay.
I mean, I think the one other thing for me, since it's a UNC related, Gigi Jackson obviously could be potentially stepping on to Carolina's campus right now. And
Yeah.
instead, he was a very late second round pick. I think after having or being told he would most likely be a lottery pick, which
Mhm.
is really $3 million coming out of school guaranteed in the first year. And I'm looking right now, 3.4 for the 15th pick, which is a very nice sum of money, and who knows what would have happened if he had stayed. Maybe his game gets exposed or things happen, but I think whether it's him or others, you really have to look a little harder at what people are saying and what their motives are around you. Because I think this one definitely, at least financially, has not worked out yet. But who's to say he won't, go on and play really well and get a bigger second contract? But
Yeah.
obviously, right now, a lot different than what he was hoping for this time last year.
So one I guess final question to wrap up the draft talk is an interesting thing. It's not a good stat for Carolina fans, but I forgot what the exact year breakdown was, but it used to be that Carolina had almost, like, it was double digit more first round draft picks than Duke. And then now over the last, I think it's 10 years, Duke has closed the gap and now I think has one or two more. A lot, I don't know, you hear a lot of, like, the fans talk about is kids obviously want to go to the league, and Carolina does have a huge NBA pedigree, but here of late they really haven't had those lottery guys. Talk about if you guys think that's something, is that a correct observation to make, first off? And number two, looking at the kids that Carolina does have committed over the next maybe 2 to 3 years, is there anyone that you guys think could be a lottery player from Carolina? Sean, start with you for that.
It's a good question. I mean, I think you saw Duke early on go straight and being very successful at the one and done model, which did realize the title in 2015, but a lot of probably seasons that didn't live up to the hype. Versus UNC, which has had a few one and dones from Kobe and Cole and Nas, but never really gained a big footing. I think we've seen in college, outside of probably that year, the teams that are winning are the teams that have a lot of veteran talent, which is what UNC has put together over the last few years. So I think you always want to be talking about the number one pick or the top picks from Carolina, but at the same time, to build a championship team, you really need guys that are staying more than 1 year for the most part, and maybe you're mixing in one or two one and done guys. So it's a hard balance to carry. I think everybody would love to see more UNC players in the pros, just given, in the 90s and early 2000s, UNC was the school that was producing the top pros, it felt like. I think with Hubert's recruiting, right now in the 2025 class, he is everybody being offered as a top 10 guy. So I think you will start to see Ian Jackson, potentially Drake Powell, two top 10 guys right now that could, if their games continue on that upward trajectory, could fit in there. Plus Elliot Cadeau in terms of what he can bring. So UNC has kind of changed it to where they are getting the high 5-star guys, but in terms of how does this continue to ebb and flow from on the court versus the NBA draft perspective will be interesting to follow as we go.
Sherrell, what about you, man? What you think?
I mean, I don't mean to be frank, but Duke has just recruited better than Carolina for the better part of a decade. I mean, really dating back to 2010. We go back, well,
Mm-hmm.
I guess the class of 2010, but Harrison Barnes' commitment, post then, North Carolina's done fine on the recruiting trail, but Duke has been better than anyone consistently now for, like I said, for more than a decade. So I think it's just when you have more 5-stars that you sign, the likelihood that those guys are going to get drafted higher, and those guys are going to become whatever they become in the NBA.
You don't
You
say.
just have more chance. Yeah, you just have more chances. So um, it's about, I guess, like, what do you want as a program? It's very difficult to have
Mm-hmm.
both, and I think that's been proven over the last 30 years. Really, I think off the top of my head, like freshman point guards, for example, I think Mike Bibby, Jerry McNamara, whoever the point guard was for Kentucky in 2012, Tyus Jones, and then maybe like Jalen Brunson or somebody are the only freshman point guards to win a title. It's been like
Mm-hmm.
5 or 6. So that kind of tells you that if you're have young players and trying to mesh that all together, no matter how talented. I mean, think about the 3 talents that Duke had in 2018 with Reddish and Zion and RJ Barrett. It's just hard to win titles. I'm not dismissing them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just hard, especially when you're a young team and you're relying completely on freshmen. So, is it that you want to have the best recruiting class? Is it that you want to have guys in the green room every year? Or is it that you want to win championships? And I think, not to look too far down the road, but that's why this particular version of Duke this upcoming season is a little scarier than the ones that have been in the past because they have that experience coming back. Um,
Yeah.
Experience and talent is what wins, and I think that's been borne out over the years of the teams that have both, win in March and April.
And then the second half of the question, Sherrell, is looking at the Carolina guys that they have coming in, say over the next 2 or 3 classes. Are there any guys on there that just, and we've talked about, I know before, but if you had to put like a nice little wager down on what are the recruits you think maybe some lottery guys, um, give us a quick, just couple names. I mean, I'm guessing Cadeau, maybe Powell. What do you think?
Yeah, it's difficult because you start thinking about measurables as well. I think
Mm-hmm.
Cadeau probably is the best of them all right now as far as being a basketball player, a product at the moment. But he unfortunately doesn't have the measurables of some of the other guys. And I think you look at Drake Powell, he has kind of everything that the NBA wants in a small forward, and even a guy who maybe could play some small ball for. You talk about 3 and D and being able to handle and aggressive and all those things. So I honestly would probably lean him a little bit, even more than Ian Jackson, just because
Hmm.
of the measurables and the athleticism and the reach and the length and all that good stuff. Now, this is probably could look ridiculous in 2.5 years when Ian Jackson goes number 5 overall or whatever. But because of how the NBA drafts, I think that's really important, and Powell has those measurables.
Look, no one ever listens to us, Sherrell. It's okay. You can make all the predictions you want. No one's keeping tabs. No one's gonna go back and listen. All right. Well, good deal, guys. So, any final thoughts, NBA? I know I only said 5 minutes. It's been 15, actually. Either of you guys have any other UNC tangential topics to talk about, or you want to move on to the recruiting?
On to the recruiting.
All right. Well, let's do it then. So there was the, I think it was the Rise complex down in Bermuda Run, where there were a coach sightings, a couple other guys also. And I apologize, I'm checking on the boards real quick. Let's just, I'll open it up. Sherrell, there were a couple events going on here that looks like some UNC coaches may have been at. For the full scoop, everyone can check the UNC basketball premium boards. But for the podcast listeners, watchers on YouTube, give us just a quick little, I guess, rundown, Rel, of what the recruiting news was from this weekend. What can you share with us, man?
So yeah, this is the second of 2 scholastic evaluation periods in June. So these are about 4 years old. The NCAA added these to kind of help remove some of the negative influences. For podcast listeners, I put influences in quotations that the players interact with. And so the thought was that if they play with their high schools, then maybe things will be a little cleaner. So schools, high schools are allowed to play in these tournaments each weekend, and a lot of times they're by state. So in North Carolina, a big one was in Bermuda Run, where a bunch of the top high schools in the state got together and played. A couple of them, obviously, Northwood with Drake Powell was there. North Mech with Isaiah Evans was there. Myers Park with Sadiq White, Bishop Boswell, Sir Muhammad, and others were there. So there's a pretty lot of high major talent in attendance. There's some younger guys in 2026 and in 2025 are there too. But for the UNC staff, there was a lot of focus, I would say, on Sadiq White, who is a 2025, I'll call him combo forward from Myers Park High School in Charlotte. He's kind of garnering more attention from UNC over the last 5 or 6 months. And Hubert Davis got his first glimpse of him watching him in person eval on, on Saturday. Jeff Lebo is the lead assistant. So that's something that we're looking at closely because it kind of fits in with the old school recruiting philosophy of Roy Williams, where an assistant makes contact, an assistant talks to the player and the high school coach for a while, then an assistant watches, then another assistant watches. Sean May watched him on Friday. Then another assistant watches. Brad Frederick watched him on Saturday, on Saturday morning. And then Lebo and Davis watched him on Saturday as well. So all 4 bench coaches have watched him. I'm sure the rest of the staff has seen his film. And he had a big weekend too. So kind of wondering what the next steps are, because it's checked all the boxes of wanting to see him playing well, and the entire staff watching him too.
Okay, interesting. Sadiq White, a name to remember. Sean, what have you seen Sadiq play, or do you have any thoughts on his game at this point, man?
Well, only on video, but I think right now he's a top 25 prospect, and in terms of the players that have been offered, really all the top 10 guys, from Darren Peterson and others, especially at that shooting guard and small forward spot. So, I think they did a fantastic job identifying the positions they wanted for 2024 early. Even though, for instance, the first guy they offered, Jaron Stevenson, there's a big lag between when he was offered and then when the second and third scholarship offers came. But once those started arriving, they identified and they were able to close guys pretty quickly going through last summer. And I think that has helped set them up for 2025. So really, as you're going through the July recruiting period, it's almost babysitting the 2024 guys. Maybe there's one other need out there or one other, maybe 1 to 2 guys they're still looking at, knowing how, up and down everything can go from a decision-making process. But for the most part, they get a head start on 2025. I saw Sherrell and Ben's note that Sean May was out on the West Coast watching Koa Pete today in Arizona. So it just gives them a little bit of opportunity to watch some of these top 10 guys that they have offers out to but at the same time monitoring. Right now, the rankings are going to change drastically in terms of where people are going. So, who's going up, who's especially in the area, who's making a big jump, etc., and they'll be able to react pretty quickly.
Yeah, go ahead, Rel.
I just wanted to jump into. I think if you notice, me and Sean and I think others on the staff have had some cynicism towards some of these 2025 offers and kind of wondering, okay, we're just going down the list and offering everyone who's good or top 10 or top 12 or whatever. What I will say is that maybe we as a staff, IC staff, also need to kind of recalibrate, because when they offered Ian Jackson last summer and Elliot Cadeau last summer, I was like, especially with Cadeau, it just didn't seem like something that would happen for Carolina. And here we are a year later, and they got both of those guys, and there wasn't a ton of known background information about UNC being in the recruitments or UNC being viable for them. They weren't mentioned really at all. So I'm trying to do a better job myself of not being a cynic when it comes to some of these players they're offering. Now, the Boozer twins, yeah, I will remain a cynic on that one. But the rest of the guys, we just kind of have to wait and see who visits, who they keep in contact with, who they watch the most during, excuse me, during the live periods in July, and just kind of track this into the fall, because there's a chance Hubert Davis has shown that they can get national recruits who are top 10 to commit to him in UNC, despite kind of the up and down nature of the last 2 seasons.
Yeah. Well, one of the other names that I'm looking here on the scoop was Jackson Keith, and I admit I don't know that much about Keith's game. This is another UNC or another Tar Heel State target out of South Durham, Southern Durham. And what about, I guess, where does he fit into the rankings, do you think, Sherrell?
So I think they're still figuring it out with him. He doesn't have an offer yet, but he's been on campus, seemed to enjoy it, and he's definitely, I would say, ascending player. He plays for Team Loaded on the Adidas circuit, so hopefully we'll be able to see him a little bit next week. But yeah, he's that kind of 2 guard, maybe can play some 3, but I would consider him like a true 2 guard. And right now they do have an offer out to Isaiah Harwell, an Idaho native. You don't hear that often.
Yeah.
Who they offered last September. So he was the first offer in 2025. So it seems like another situation where they're going to give Harwell a little time. And if he's not ready to make a decision, then they'll keep recruiting him, but to start to offer other players. And I think in addition to Peterson and Harwell, I think that Jackson Keith is right there.
Sean, what about you? Have you seen much of basically the same question I asked you about Sadiq White? Anything on Jackson Keith's game? Is he someone that's popped up on your radar?
I mean, yeah, you kind of seen his name a lot. I think he was on from the Max Press sophomore All-American team. He was on that general listing. So, he had a good season. You saw him visiting UNC, talented. Yeah, I agree with Sherrell in terms of shooting guard, 2 guard, and ability to score the basketball. So I think for him right now, he's ranked in close to the 40s, but will be interesting to track his progress on that Adidas circuit, which doesn't get as much publicity, obviously, as the Nike ones, but all it takes is a little bit of time in July, and you can go ascending up the rankings. And even flashing back to last July, in terms of the question was, will Drake Powell get an offer? Who are they looking at for the wing spot? Drake Powell, got to see him in Kansas City, was good but fairly passive. But you could see a lot of the intangibles, and then look where he is now, top 10 prospect, completely different outlook on where he's at. So I think this just goes to the coaching staff and who they're identifying from a talent perspective, as well as really a projection standpoint, because they've been going after and they've been winning battles with the top guys. But at the same time, you need to, what we were talking about earlier from an NBA one and done perspective, would you rather have had Vernon Carey or Armando Bacot? I think everybody would agree Armando, just given the differences. But at the same time, when you are going after those top 10, top 20 guys, you might have them committed, but until they're on campus, you never really know if that's where they're going to they're going to land. So
Hmm.
once again, I think talent identification, whether it's a prospect from North Carolina or the surrounding states or somebody in that New York Northeast area, talent identification and locking in that that'll be everything that determines how UNC is going to do under Hubert Davis, these next few years.
One
Moran, come
last
back.
jump in. One last jump in, John,
Go
just to
ahead, Rob.
close the note on Sadiq White. So obviously EYBL starts not this coming week, but the week of July 4th. I think the first day is actually July 4th that the tournament starts. Same thing with Adidas. But Jaron Stevenson obviously committed to Alabama, is reclassing, so I don't
Hmm.
think he's going to be playing at the Peach Jam. He plays for Team United 17s on the Nike EYBL circuit. Sadiq White plays on Team United 16s. There seems to be a big hole at the combo forward spot. So maybe we could see White move up to 17s at Peach Jam, which would be a real big
Hmm.
test for him to play against, stronger, faster, more athletic, older guys.
Interesting. Before we take our quick commercial break, Sean, any thoughts on that on him potentially playing up?
I mean, I think it offers a great opportunity to play up. You're going against the top athletes. A lot of guys will stay on the U16 circuit, which is completely fine. But you're always challenged. I mean, the U17 you can't get any better than that, especially at Peach Jam. So it'll be interesting to
Hmm.
track how everything goes.
Well, Inside Carolina will have wall to floor, wall to ceiling, whatever phrase you want to use, coverage of the Peach Jam as always. That's going to be, sounds like it's going to be a pretty interesting Peach Jam this year. We'll go ahead though and take a quick commercial break. This is where I get to plug our amazing sponsor, Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Remember that as Inside Carolina premium subscribers, you do get 10% off of your offer. Father's Day has come and went, but hey, it is pretty dang hot outside. I don't know if anyone in North Carolina has noticed, but the heat and humidity are back. But hey, it's also a great time for grilling. Johnny T-Shirt has you covered for everything that you could need for the grill, for the family, for the summertime. Make sure that you go and check them out. This is probably also the time of year where you may even find some closeout stuff. I know they usually try to do some summer sales. So definitely check them out and get that 10% off. Remember, from being an Inside Carolina premium subscriber. For the podcast listeners, we are going to go ahead and just take a quick break as well for some national ads. And when we get back, going to just continue talking some recruiting. But I have a question for both Sean and Sherrell about UNC's national appeal at this point. So stay tuned for that. We'll be right back in a second. All right, and we are back with the Inside Carolina Coast to Coast podcast. Jon Seiglie here with Sean Moran and Sherrell McMillan standing in for Joey Powell for today's episode. So in the first half of the podcast, guys, Sherrell, you mentioned about the staff really offering the top guys and maybe even having to internally for Inside Carolina, like kind of recalibrate. All right, the staff, are they just offering just to offer kind of these guys? And the Boozer twins aside, because yeah, I agree with you there, man. But we have seen them, especially this last recruiting class, really pull in some big names. So as we really start to hit the summer recruiting stride, the UNC brand and Hubert Davis and his staff, give us like an assessment of where you think they are at this point, especially when you're looking at the list of offered prospects.
I mean, frankly, and they're still one of the top brands in college basketball. I think the fan base and our listeners and readers are going to be upset with what I'm about to say, but they're not the top brand in college basketball anymore. And that's not a negative. It's just kind of reality when it comes to recruiting and what some of these high schoolers think and where they want to play and all that good stuff. Um, it's just kind of what it is, and I hate to be so blunt, but that's where things are now. One thing I will say is that it's not as bad as maybe some of the folks think, because in our kind of insular inside Carolina like culture, it's kind of like, man, they're having trouble signing people and what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. But if you talk to national writers and other reporters nationally and players and coaches, if we say like, man, what's going on there? Would your guy be interested in UNC? They're like, it's Carolina. That's kind of the answer we always get. Like, how could my guy not be interested in Carolina? How could he not want to take a visit to Carolina? So I think the brand is strong. It's just not, the number one top tier brand like it was for so long. That's not to say it can't be back there. It's still probably 3 or 4, all things considered. But that's just kind of where things stand now. And I think Hubert Davis, the run 2 years ago, or I guess a year ago, did a lot to help with that. Now they took a few steps back with the way the season ended last year, but recruiting guys like Elliot Cadeau, who everyone wanted to play with, helps kind of make Carolina cool. And I think Ian Jackson does that to some degree as well. And if you can start stacking those recruiting wins together and then start putting, a season here, well, not even a season here, if they can start putting together, a 15-game stretch of 13-2 and do that, 3 or 4 times over the course of 2 or 3 seasons, then it starts to build and then you really get momentum. I still think this staff has a ton of potential, but this is a really important year coming up. And I do think once you start looking at, if say things didn't go the way they wanted next year, then you're kind of looking at 5 straight years of kind of mediocre play outside of a 21 game stretch at the end at the end of 2021. When you get to 4 or 5 years of that in a row, then that can start to erode the brand to some degree. But I don't think there's been a ton of brand erosion at this point.
Go ahead, Jon. Jump in.
Not much to add. I agree with Sherrell. I mean, I think this time last year, UNC definitely had a swagger they hadn't had on the recruiting trail in terms of Hubert Davis coming off making the championship, kind of having the brand back in the spotlight. Obviously, having the brand in the spotlight almost in a lot of negative sense throughout the whole college basketball season, I think brought that back down. But you have Elliot Cadeau, who's going to be playing there this year. So I think if he can do his thing, combined with RJ and Armando, 2 very well-known faces in college basketball, and then you're able to, still keep Ian Jackson and Drake Powell getting ready for next year. That's a lot to build on and to have that brand up in that top tier. But once again, I think a lot needs to happen over this year and next year to make sure that stays up there.
Well, and then you have to have personalities too. I would say you have to have people who are engaging, who want to be out front, and you definitely have that with Armando Bacot. Elliot Cadeau's kind of play, I think, does it for him. And then you look at the 2024 class. I think Drake Powell and Ian Jackson's play does it for them. But then you have James Brown, who's a guy that I think media and fans will gravitate towards pretty instantly. So if you have a good mix of that helps with the brand too.
Completely agree with everything you guys said. That's why y'all are the experts. And like I said at the beginning, you guys can do the heavy lifting. Jumping back then to the recruiting trail itself, from the last, I don't think there's been a coast to coast now for a couple weeks. Over that time period, was there anything else that you guys wanted to talk about that's happened since the last time that we had a podcast? Sean, anything that you've been waiting on? Any thoughts on the recruiting trail?
No, I mean, I think we keep seeing the question on the transfer portal with 3 scholarships. Are they looking at anyone else? I'll have to rely on Sherrell for that. I haven't heard anything. Wouldn't surprise me if they were not, but I know that's a question that a lot of people have right now. I think they have a very talented team in terms of grades. I give it a B plus in terms of who they lost, who they brought in. I think. Once again, if they had that athletic slasher, that would have been great. But I think they've been able to retool the team, pretty quickly. And once again, you want to have enough talent, but maybe not too much. So it's a tough balancing act to have.
Sherrell, anything that you've been waiting to get off your chest over the last time that there was a pod?
No, like Sean said, that's kind of the big question. And I can say that they're not going to add someone just to add someone, just to say, okay, there's 12 players on scholarship. Like the player has to be able to help in some capacity, whether it's just in practice or whether it's as a backup or providing, just some additional depth. But at this point, I don't think they've really found someone. I know they have looked, but I don't think they found someone who kind of matches exactly what they want, who didn't have some kind of other thing they're dealing with. So, it could be. I think it's a situation where they probably will leave the summer with 10 guys on scholarship. Now,
okay,
stranger things have happened. Mike Copeland back in the day was a
Cope.
depth signing. Yeah, I think that was like August. I think he signed like August 5th or something, and classes started August 25th or something like that. So those kind of things can happen, but materially, like functionally, this is the team. Anyone else added is not going to be unless like the greatest wing of all time enters the transfer portal as a grad transfer in the next couple of weeks and decides he wants to go to Carolina. This 10 is kind of what it's going to be.
So, did you have a quick thought, Sean? Or okay, good deal. Let me ask you this, Rel. Just a quick answer for this one. 50-50 chance. Do you think it's greater than 50 or less than 50 that Carolina will add at least one more scholarship player before the summer period ends?
Less than 50.
All right. Follow up to that then. We've seen what's been happening at West Virginia. Any of those guys that might be, what happened there? The guys are jumping into the portal late. It could happen at another school. We don't know. But anything from that West Virginia situation that is Carolina monitoring those guys now that they're in the portal? We heard any inkling of that?
Yeah, I mean, they look at the portal every day, probably more than once a day, but I don't think any of those guys are the right fit for UNC or UNC is the right fit for those guys on both sides. So I'd be surprised. But of course, it's recruiting, so never say never. But I would say very, very, very slim chance.
Okay. And that's kind of what I was figuring because I haven't seen too many reports across the board, but good to know. And Sean, let me ask you this because this is one thing though, is looking at the team. If you had to say if there was one archetype player who would hit that if they hit the portal, you think Carolina should jump all over. What type of player would that be at this point, standing where we are with this class and the summer?
I mean, I think it goes back to that athletic small forward, but at the same time, you have Cormac Ryan, you have Harrison Ingram, so then you have Jalen Withers at the 4 and Wojcik off the bench. So I don't think they're going to be trying to recruit over anybody. All those guys can play a few different positions, but I think it's hard. They've already added so much. In addition to who's returning and who's trying to make the freshman to sophomore year leap. But I think if they did have just one additional wing, 2, 3, 3, 4, that would be that would be ideal. But at the same time, I think they have enough to do what it takes to reach their potential. Obviously, injuries can always affect anything, but you can't control that. And I think they do have a pretty deep team, especially from the guard perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sherrell, anything to add to that? I mean, if there is like maybe, I don't know, a surprise superstar 3-4, do you think that is what the Carolina coaches are potentially targeting at this point? If there is a surprise entry?
I think additional help in the post would always be welcome. You can never really turn that down because there are so few of those guys who are competent and and can kind of walk and chew gum at the same time. That's always been the joke about kind of the bigger guys. So I think there, and then the wing as well. I think they're pretty set at the guard position. You hope and you think that Seth Trimble will kind of take that leap that Sean talked about. That gives you pretty good depth at the point guard position, and then between Ryan and Trimble to some degree and Davis, you've got 4 guards basically, and you honestly don't need more than 4 guards because I don't think you're going to play more than 4. And then you've got 2 wings. I would say Ryan could be kind of the smaller wing, Ingram kind of the bigger wing. Withers can do a little bit of both, and then you've got Baycott with Washington down there. So I do think it's a good roster. I know people are kind of freaking out that they aren't, haven't used the last 3 scholarships, but I think that's more about practice. People freaking out about practice, and then thinking worst term where somebody springs an ankle or 2 people sprain ankles, and then you're down, from 9 guys who will functionally play to 7 who are really available. Now I get that situation, but I think ideally, if health is assured, which I guess it never is, 8 guys is enough, and then you need that 9th just in case of an emergency. I don't think coaches really want to play more than 8 or 9 guys. So um,
Yep.
we'll see what happens. I think they've done a solid job of retooling, like Sean said. I kind of agree with that B grade. I think maybe keeping Wiltshire and adding a wing would have made it an A, but that's kind of where they're at, and they've got a ton of experience and talent, and just has to see. We have to see kind of what happens on the court as far as chemistry, and then how the coaching staff has kind of grown from last year and learned from some of the mistakes they made. And if that all comes together, then yeah, they got a chance.
Yeah. Definitely. All right, guys, let's go ahead and start winding things down with a look over the future. Let's say like 2 weeks to a month here. What's coming up on the recruiting trail that Carolina fans should really be focusing on? Whoever wants to jump in with that, I don't know. Let's pick Sherrell. Since you were just talking, I'm gonna shoot it over to Sean. Sean, what events are coming up that you have your eye on, and that the Carolina fans should also be really looking forward to?
I think this week there's a topic right now on the premium NBA MBPA top 100 in terms of Powell and James Brown being there. Sherrell put a note. So looking forward to seeing how that is. That was the event used to go to in Charlottesville back when they had it there, but that'll be a good last step in June, and then obviously July. With the major events, all the coaches back out on the road, and a lot of work going in from the Inside Carolina staff tracking that. I know that's always the fun period with the live recruiting back on the AAU versus the high school. Is kind of where the fun is.
Yep. Sherrell, what about you, man? What are you anything aside from that looking forward to, or is that kind of what you're focusing on in the short term future here?
Yeah, that's the recruiting stuff over the next month. They added a recruiting period in July, the second weekend. So I'm curious to see if that is anything of note, because I can't imagine a lot of the top guys wanting to play or being willing to play that weekend. So we'll see if maybe guys on smaller circuits, or guys not on Adidas and EYBL and Under Armour, if they get some attention from the UNC staff. And then just from a team perspective, they start practice, I believe this week, as a team. They get a certain
Mhm.
amount of practices each summer. So, excuse me. So, kind of want to see what, if anything, kind of leaks out from that stuff. Always wanted to get a head start. Look forward to, even if it's just like those 30, 45-second clips of just guys running around taking shots. Like, that kind of gives you your little taste of basketball in the middle of June, early July.
Yep. All right. Final question for me for the podcast. Sean, what is one name that we have not discussed yet on the podcast that at the event you are going to be following, either just because you're interested in them or you think that there could be a UNC angle there?
Great question. I mean, I think I did throw his name out there, but Darren Peterson is a guy that I'm curious to see, are they really focused on him, or was it more of, a top 10 offer, just because he played really well at the U17. So that's the name I'll be tracking to see how much are they actually watching him in July.
Okay. Interesting. All right. I'll write that one down. Sherrell, I'm going to ask you now. What you got?
Well, I'll defer to the premium readers, because there was a note about it from USA Basketball, a player that Sean May watched. So we are curious to see. He's kind of who I was talking about, who's not on one of those three major circuits.
Mhm.
Kind of watching him to see if Carolina gets more involved. Currently playing with the USA under 19 team, and I think he had a good game today, from what I've read. So that's kind of where we're at.
All right, good deal. All right, guys, we will go ahead and wrap the podcast there. I want to thank everyone for listening in, especially for everyone that was watching along with us live on YouTube. Do apologize for the late start, but thank you all for being here. With that, we will sign off. This is Jon Seiglie for Sean Moran and Sherrell McMillan, the Inside Carolina crew, sponsored by the best company in the world, Giant T-Shirt and GiantT-Shirt.com. Thank you all very much, and have a great night, all.